Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to be doing our weekly mock draft. A little different than usual. We're going to be doing this one real time with some other people. Just thought this would be more fun, honestly, and it'll focus on the first 5 rounds, which are going to be really the most important part of the draft, and we'll get some actual people in here, which will kind of help with the teams being a little more realistic, in my opinion. So, with that all said, you'll see there's already been some selections here. I had already recorded an intro to this, but didn't have audio working for it, so now that's fixed. I'm just redoing this. But we're just going to kind of talk about the way things are in free agency, where this team is, and how we're really going to address this. And we also want to talk about a couple of these rumors going around, because it has been a very, very busy day. So we're going to go ahead and start with that. So, first of all, first few days of free agency for the Jacksonville Jaguars. They lost 2 key players. I don't mean that as a pun, but 2 key players on this team. One was Arden Key, and the other guy was Jawan Taylor. And unfortunately, the teams they lost them to were some of the worst teams you could have imagined, honestly. I think Arden Key going to the Titans is really hard to swallow as a Jaguars fan. You know, this was a guy who told us he understood the way the rivalry was. He understood the lack of respect that Tennessee had for Jacksonville, and he did not like Tennessee. Yet here he is later playing for them just only after the season's ended. And ultimately, you know, it comes down to money. It comes down to being able to support your family and earn what you deserve, right? You know, he earned the contract he got. I don't think it was anything outrageous, but it's definitely a hard pill to swallow. And, I mean, as fans, I think we can fairly be frustrated with it. So you've got that move. And then you've got Jawan Taylor, who very quickly in free agency took a mega deal to go to the Kansas City Chiefs, paid $20 million a year, with 3 of those years fully guaranteed, not to play right tackle, but to be the left tackle, the franchise tackle for Patrick Mahomes. So crazy deal. In my opinion, something that should be extremely risky for the Chiefs unless they decide to move him back to the right side. But hey, I mean, that's a team that, quite frankly, anything they've done, no matter how ridiculous it may have looked to anyone, ends up working out the vast majority of the time. And so, you know, as hard as it is to believe that Jawan Taylor is going to become this really great left tackle, I'm not going to be shocked if that happens, just because things work out for him. And so, 2 very hard losses for this team. You know, I think it really adds on to the needs you're going to have, because now Walker Little is not a great backup anymore. Walker Little is your starter at right tackle. You have no backup on the offensive line at this point that can play tackle. You got no one you can trust. And at guard, you'd have Tyler Shatley, and he's already your backup for center. So the offensive line's definitely going to need some depth. That's going to be really important for them to address. Now, the other part of this with Arden Key is that your pass rush, you really have your 2 starters. You've got your interior back the way it was. And I think you've got an ascending player in Roy Robertson Harris. But on the outside, you don't have any depth. I mean, unless you call Caleb on Chase on that. And unfortunately, his career has just not worked out that well. So that's kind of the situation you're in for the pass rush right now. And so I think they're going to have to address that. I think it's something they probably address in free agency with an underrated signing. That's what they did last year with Arden Key. I think they'll do something similar again. And they've actually, for one, been linked to Frank Clark. So that might be a direction they go. But hey, that's just a rumor. And there's nothing concrete right now. And then at cornerback, you've also got a situation where your best corner behind your outside starters, and you need a nickel to be able to play, your best corner is Chris Claybrooks after those guys, which is really bad. It's not a good situation for the team. And so they're going to need to get a corner. Now, talking about rumors and things going around, the Jaguars, outside of being linked to Frank Clark, they've only been linked to really cornerbacks. There was also a rumor that Zadarius Smith might be a player they're watching. However, I don't think that's super credible. I think there's a good chance that's not legit. We don't know that for sure, though. But at cornerback, there was Tavier Thomas, slot corner for the Houston Texans early on, that was mentioned. You've got Sean Murphy-Bunting, a guy that we talked about on the channel, that I think is probably the most cost-effective and smart decision for that need on the team. And so, that's kind of what you're looking at now for the Jaguars there. Those are options they have. Now, there was also a rumor, and I think this one's credible because of who it's coming from, but pretty much all day today on Twitter, there was talk about the Jaguars trying to pursue Darius Slayton. For myself, we're recording this on Wednesday night. It's the day before I upload this video. Darius Slayton was released in the morning. He is currently without a team, and one of the Twitter accounts that he's an insider for the Jaguars. The actual name escapes, but it's E_Dilla. You guys will probably know who that is. Many people do. He was talking about how the Jaguars have shown interest in Darius Slay. They talked to him today, which will be yesterday for you guys. It will be on Wednesday. And I believe they have offered him a contract. Now, there are a lot of teams that have sent contracts to Darius Slay. A lot of teams that have offered him stuff. And as of now, the report was that he's going to sign with the Ravens. However, it looks like that might not be happening. So, a lot's probably changed by the time this comes out, but that's really where I'm at as far as what I know. And so, truth is, at this point, we really don't know what the Jaguars are going to need in the draft. We know, we kind of have it narrowed down to where we know certain positions are not going to be a big deal. But some of these needs are going to be addressed in free agency. I think there's going to be one of them that you're going to see resolved. Because I think for this team, it's going to be really hard to have a great roster going into the season if you have, say, 3 big needs going into free agency. The draft. So, say you need an offensive lineman, you need a pass rusher, and then you need a corner. Well, one of those might not be available in the 3rd round when you're making the 3rd selection. So, it's not an ideal situation. Hence, with this draft, what we're going to try to do is still draft the best player available. That's what we're going to look for. But we're going to understand that right now, we don't know exactly what issues will be addressed by the time of the draft, and we will probably not be able to resolve all of these issues in this draft unless things go really well. So that's really where we're at. We'll see who's available when we get to the pick. We're already pretty far through the 1st round, so it will be pretty short for me. We see guys that we would usually be interested in at that selection already off the board. One of them being Osiris Torrance. You could even throw in Jordan Addison. I don't think Addison's a need, but I think he's a really good player for that part of the draft. He's a guy I think I have at like 10th on my big board right now, and this is all subject to change, but very talented player. I think he's going to be a really good receiver. So you've got some guys off the board. We'll see where things are. We'll consider moving up and moving down throughout this draft where it makes sense. And I think if there's a lot of good options and not one clear one, we'll probably be moving down from 24 if someone's interested in taking that selection. So that's where we're at with this. I will go ahead and move forward to that pick. So I will be back once we get to the 24th selection. All right, so we are back now. We're at the 22nd selection of this draft. We've still got some good choices on the board currently. Top guy on my board at this point would be Bijan Robinson. However, I think he'd be gone a lot earlier, and I don't think he's a need for the Jaguars. So usually you want to draft best player available, but just running back in the 1st round in this situation makes really no sense to me. So you've got him. You've also got some other really enticing options. You've got Broderick Jones, who I think at this point is the most valuable player that is available, and he will probably be our pick if he falls. We don't know if he will, though. Broderick Jones is going to offer you another tackle. It's going to allow you to probably start one of your tackles at guard, and he can move out if you need it if someone goes down. And so we also see here, this is the next guy we were going to talk about, Deonte Banks go off the board. Deonte Banks, I think with the way things look, probably would have been our second option here. Really talented cornerback. He's going to be physical, going to be good in press coverage. I think he's going to be someone who really succeeds in the NFL and would be worthy of being selected at the 24th selection for the Jaguars. However, he's off the board here, so he's not going to really be on our radar. This is probably going to end up being Broderick Jones. Other guys we'd consider, Dalton Kincaid and Michael Mayer are both very talented tight ends, very close for me. I've got the edge on Kincaid. I just think his ability as a receiver is absolutely ridiculous. He's got a ton of athleticism, and while he doesn't block that great, he kind of fits what you're looking for in a Doug Peterson tight end. So, to me, I just think he makes a ton of sense as a player. Now, we see Keely Ringo go off the board. Other guys we would have considered here, could have been Cam Smith, Clark Phillips. I think those are both really talented players. But at this point, Broderick Jones, to me, he's a top 10 prospect. He's one of your most talented guys. He's going to be the selection. And I think out of all the needs on this team, the one that is the most important because of what it protects is the offensive line. Because ultimately, quarterback is what matters. And if you do not have a good enough offensive line to protect that quarterback, you are screwed. You're probably going to lose him to injury. You're not going to have him around the whole season, and your team is going to be dead in the water. You look at the New York Jets here the last season. Now they're probably getting Aaron Rodgers. That's probably going to be finalized here soon. But before that, they had this great team that could only go 7-10 because they didn't have a quarterback that could win games for them. And so, this is important for the Jaguars to protect their quarterback. And you get what I think is a fantastic tackle for this team, someone who could take over on the left side if needed and really just fill in wherever you need it. We'll look at his draft profile on here for a minute. He's about 6'5". I think you can move him into guard if you need to early in the season. He's a guy who just oozes that physical talent, but needs more technical refinement, if really anything. And so I think if you're working that stuff out, which I think is very possible, I don't think that's a huge issue for the team, you're getting a really talented player. You get a guy who has really good instincts, someone who's going to be a big deal in the run game as well, which is the place that needs to be a point of emphasis for the Jaguars. So getting a guy like Broderick Jones is going to have a big impact for this team. Going to be a really important selection. I think that's the best guy on the board at this point of the draft. And ultimately, he'll probably be gone earlier than this pick. Realistically, that's going to be the case. But for us here, he's fallen. There's probably going to be someone who falls, and that's just the situation that we're in. So with that said, we'll be back for the next selection. All right, so we are back just a couple selections before our second round pick. We've got 3 teams left, and we've got a couple really good players still on the board at this point. I think you could argue more than that, but as far as really good value for this selection, still got 3 guys in the top 40 on my board. The top guy right now, of who's left, I would say it's Tyreek Stevenson. He's a guy who's got a great head on his shoulders, good character. He's a physical press corner, someone you can move inside the slot. Really just a lot of things that you're going to look for in a corner. He was really one of the only bright spots on his team with the Miami Hurricanes. I think at this point of the draft, you're really in a situation where you've hit your offense, you hit the offensive line, right? you still would like to get a tight end if possible, but there's really no one sitting here that you would feel comfortable taking at this point. Tucker Kraft is your top guy, and he's someone you might consider in the third round. So you're looking at defense at this point in the draft. I think Tyreek Stevenson obviously is an option. Chris Smith is another guy in the secondary that I like a lot. Question though is, can he make a full-time transition to slot corner, which he has played in. He's got experience there. And he is a very talented, instinctive player. You see him make impacts. You see him show off his intelligence. All things you gotta like about him. Another option, though, that we could look at if Stevenson's off the board will be Derek Hall. He's going to be a 3-4 outside linebacker in the NFL, a player who's still developing pass rush moves like so much of this class, but really has a lot of potential. You know, I think for the second round, you're getting a guy that, I mean, I've seen people mock him to Jacksonville at 24. So, very, very talented player for this point in the draft. And I think it's going to be one of those two guys at this selection. It really just comes down to whether Stevenson falls or not, which I am not sure of at the moment. Other guys who we really could have thought of here if they weren't on the board, Xavier Hutchinson probably be next for me. Very talented receiver. I'm a lot higher on him than most people in the community because, well, part of it is a little bit of bias. He's from Jacksonville, but he's also just a guy that offers something that a lot of receivers don't in this class. He's got great size. He's 6'3". I think he might have come out actually a little shorter. Yeah, closer to 6'2" at the combine. But still, I mean, he's a talented player who's got room to grow. He's your contested catch guy. He's the Marvin Jones replacement. He's a guy I really like. A guy I would love to get for this team. But at this point, Tyreek Stevenson, in my opinion, is the best guy on the board. I think Derek Hall's got a legit argument here too. And he's a guy we've taken before. But Stevenson's a bit higher. Just think it's a really good pick for your corner position. Now, like we said earlier, you know, maybe corner isn't something this team needs to worry about when they get to the draft. Maybe they've got someone in free agency. But at this point, this is a need. This is a position they have to address. And there is going to be a point in the draft like this where you're looking at your board and a corner is at the top of it. I think that's going to happen with how much talent there is at that position. So we're going to go with Stevenson. That's going to be our pick. And at this point, really, as far as needs, things you want to address, I think tight ends would be good. You know, receiver, if you could land Hutchinson in the third round, that's tremendous value. But you're also looking for a pass rusher on defense. You want to get someone else to throw in there, someone to develop. That's definitely going to be a need for this team. So, with that said, we'll move to the next pick. Maybe we'll trade up if there's a really good player falling down the board, but we'll see you at that next pick. All right, so we are back now, about to our third selection. Just got the Ravens and the Vikings left before this. We've got a few guys we'd be interested in at this selection. We'll see if they hold up to the pick, which one of them will, based off of that selection. Our top guy on the board at this point is Xavier Hutchinson. I think we touched on him earlier, but Hutchinson is going to profile really similar to what you had in Marvin Jones. He's also a versatile player, can move inside, has really great size for the position, ended up testing out as a better athlete than people really expected him to at the combine. And so, to me, he's an ascending player on my draft board. He's a guy who's really falling in that round 2 range. And I think at this point of the draft, he's an absolute steal for Jacksonville. Dude who lived there when he grew up, played for Iowa State, and ended up being a really talented, high-character kind of player. And so, he's going to be our selection if he's available. Another guy we would consider here, as much as we think, okay, we already hit corner, we don't need that necessarily. Travius Hodges-Tomlinson is also a really talented cornerback. He's not got the ideal size, but he's still someone that I think is going to be really successful in the NFL despite that. Now, if we look at his size here, I think 56 on my board. He's 5'8". It's not ideal. But outside of that, he plays really well. He's, to me, a lesser version of Clark Phillips. And Phillips is a guy we've got ranked really high in this draft, around like 24. But with that all said, Xavier Hutchinson's going to be the pick. He's the best guy on the board at this point. Really talented receiver. Now, is he going to be a starter for this team? No, he can come in if you have an injury. And I think ultimately for this offense, if you have an injury at receiver, it's a really bad situation right now because you don't have really anyone outside that you can use other than Tim Jones. And I don't think that's good enough, honestly. I mean, I think Tim Jones maybe is a guy who can develop and be that, but we haven't seen the sign of that, and I don't want to play it risky like that. I want to get in good players. I think it'd be nice to upgrade receiver if you can, and maybe Xavier Hutchinson's a guy that starts for you in the long term. I think he is. I think he's someone who can do that. And so at this point in the draft, if Hutchinson's on the board for Jacksonville, it just makes too much sense. As well, another consideration in this, you look at our edge options here. Honestly, there's not a single player I would consider at this point in the draft. There just really isn't. And as far as nose tackle, you don't really got anyone there. Defensive line, you could look at Jacqueline Roy. I think he would be worth a selection, but I don't think he's necessarily a fantastic selection at that point. I don't think he's the best guy you can get for the 88th pick of the draft. So with that all said, we're going Xavier Hutchinson. On the offensive side of the ball at this point, you really just want a tight end. I mean, that's the only thing you really have left to hit. And I don't think that's an absolute necessity. I don't think you absolutely have to do that. And on the defensive side, you got your corner. You hit the biggest need there. And ultimately, if you can improve the pass rush, that's good. But the team can also sign guys. There's also people in free agency. You can get them late in the offseason. So definitely things to consider. But we'll be back for the next pick. Probably going to stay put there. So I'll see you guys for that one. Alright, so we're back now for the fourth round of this draft. And these will be our last selections at 19 and 25 in this round. We do have a fifth round selection, however, that is not owned by the Jaguars. It has not been updated on here. That selection is sent to the Atlanta Falcons as part of the Calvin Ridley trade package since he has been reinstated. So we will not be worrying about making that pick. Now, as far as what's on the board here, we've got one guy who's fallen really far down the board, and that's Jarrett Patterson. Guy I think that could sneak into the second round. I think that from everything I've seen, it's a guy that needs a little bit of refinement with his instincts and really just his intelligence of the game, but shows the ability to be a really good guard. And so he's a player I'd like for the Jaguars if they can get him in the third round or later. And surprisingly, he's still here on the board. I think other options you could think about, Brandon Joseph. Now we'll make sure that 6'1" is correct, because at that kind of size, yeah, it's 6 foot here. You could move to strong safety. You might have the size to be able to do that. Maybe he needs to put on a little bit of weight, and that's really where the need is for Jacksonville. So you could look at that with a larger free safety, moving them to that position. I think that's something that the Jaguars could definitely look to add on as far as depth. And, potentially maybe that's a starter after this next season. So he's another player we could consider at this point. Trey Dean, another strong safety, didn't have a great day at the combine though. You kind of wonder about him. You also like Zach Pickens as depth on the defensive line. Alright, so we see that's the final pick before the selection. I think with the board the way it is, at this point, I think we're going to shoot for Jarrett Patterson. It's just too good of value. you're selecting in the hundreds, around I think 121 at this point. You've got a player you think can go in the second round. You've just got to make that pick. I think it adds on nice depth to the offensive line. You really hit all the positions that you have to hit. So I think that's something you could definitely be fine with for the Jaguars. Now at this point, we'd like to hit defensive line. You still want to get that. Tight end would be really nice. But, ultimately, you're still looking for best player available at this point in the draft. And I don't think there's many positions that are completely out of question where you cannot add a player just because it's a worthless pick. Maybe you're talking about quarterback or linebacker, but the rest of these positions, even the ones you took here, I think you can argue you could use another, maybe other than receiver as well. So with that said, we'll be back for the next selection in just a moment, so we'll see you for that one. All right, and now we're back for our last selection in this video here. We're going to be selecting after the Cleveland Browns. On the board, we got a lot of the same players available. You got Brandon Joseph still here, Trey Dean. I think these are options for your secondary for depth right now. DeWayne McBride would be a really nice backup running back, maybe a rotational guy for the team. So you could definitely look at him in that role. Zach Evans, also a talented running back. Tyke Smith, just talking about another guy that goes in your backfield. But I think the direction that we want to go with this pick, you've got Zach Pickens here, but there's a defensive lineman I think I'd be comfortable taking here. He is not ranked high on the board on here at all. And quite frankly, he should be ranked a lot higher than what he is here. I would take him at this point in the draft. And that's Moro Ajamo. I think this is a guy who's criminally underrated right now. From a character standpoint, he's a lot of what you're asking for. You're not going to worry about that. He's a talented guy that can play more on the interior of the defensive line, and while that may be something that is not the biggest need as far as the pass rush, I still think it's a nice thing to add to the team. And so that's going to be our last selection here. So I think with these picks, you're getting talented players, you're getting good value at all of them. You're getting guys who are going to be good additions to this team. Now, based off of these rankings, because I have not got this far through the players, I've gone through about 110 still, haven't got to my scouting for a while, but Moro Ajamo I think is a lot higher ranked than 189 on this list. Broderick Jones is the guy who should be gone well before the first pick. Tyreek Stevenson, I think that you could see him fall to that second pick, but I think he's a more valuable prospect. I think he's a really good culture fit as well, which is what you're going to look for. Xavier Hutchinson, talented receiver with the size. He's got all that. He's just not a super athletic guy. He offers the element you're missing to your offense. You get Jarrett Patterson for your offensive line depth. I think it's a pretty good draft. I think you're getting good players in Jacksonville. So that's going to be our picks. I think as far as what you wish you could hit, you've got edge for sure. You want to get another guy there if you can. Ultimately, are there really the picks to do it? I think you're going to miss something in the draft, right? I mean, unless you trade back from that first selection. And with Broderick Jones on the board, it didn't make sense. You're getting a player who's worth a lot more than the selection. So we went ahead and picked him up. I think that's just the better decision in that situation. So I wish you were able to hit pass rush here, but you still answered a lot of your other questions on the team. Pass rush is something that they could address, heck, maybe even after the draft. Sometimes there's guys that are available on the trade block for cheap. You could find pass rushers still in free agency pretty later on. You can maybe go throw a flyer at one of these older guys. There are people who will go Super Bowl hunting. They'll take cheaper contracts just to have that opportunity. And so Jacksonville can make those kinds of moves, I think. So with that said, ultimately I think it's a solid draft. I think you got good value at these picks. And so I want to thank you all for watching this video. hope to have another live stream here soon or have some more stuff to talk about for the Jaguars. Kind of at a standstill with news. As of now, we've got more stuff on the Darius Slay situation. He's not being released as of now. So if they're able to rework the deal and keep him around, that whole idea is kind of, thrown out the door. And we don't really have anything to go off of for Jacksonville. We don't know what moves they're making. They may not really do much at all. So not a whole lot to talk about, but hopefully something happens soon. Hopefully we have some things that we can talk about. So thank you all for watching. I appreciate your time here for sure. We'll put out more content as things happen. And with that said, I hope you have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.